Hi everyone, I'm John Nepper, the Trust and Connection Maximizer. Welcome to another episode of To Talk Smart, where I am interviewing educational leaders who are the movers and shakers, the heavy hitters in the world of public education. My guests share their stories, their ideas, and their strategies about best practices for people in leadership positions such as principals, district administrators, and superintendents. My guest on today's episode of To Talk Smart is Dr. Blane McCann. Dr. McCann is a lifelong educator with 33 years of experience as a school administrator, including 17 as a superintendent. He coaches principals, superintendents, and school board members and works with state associations and agencies supporting schools and districts. His work centers around developing and implementing personalized learning approaches in the school district. Blane is passionate about teaching learners how they learn best, helping them find their path to success. Blane's a former teacher, principal, and superintendent in Florida, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. During his career as a superintendent, several schools received the Blue Ribbon Award for Excellence. Further, Shorewood High School was named the top Wisconsin high school by U.S. News and World Report. Good morning, Blane.
Morning, John. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Hey, Blane, we worked together at Blane Middle School for several years, many years ago, but we worked together. One of the things you were able to do was really get people to come together in a way where we were willing to try to experiment with you. What was your secret for all of that?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I think working with great people is always, like yourself, is always it's always the first step in being able to accomplish something like that and bringing people together. I think really the first part of that is helping people understand. I guess if I transport myself back to 1995, I really was working on a shared vision. I wanted to bring the visions of everybody that they had for the school. And you might remember one of the first activities we did it in small groups, and everybody drew their vision of the school. I don't know if you remember this. And then, of course, I put all of those visions over the copy machine because that's where everybody went, right? So people could see them every day. But so it was sort of a symbolic leadership frame of Bowman and Deal, if you recall, if you've seen any of that. But I think the first thing when I was beginning to do that was really about developing a shared vision where everybody could see themselves in it. I think today you might reference Simon Sinek's work on, everybody knows their why and what they're doing. But so my personal mission at that time and throughout my career was, how do I create structures so people can find purpose and meaning in their work? I couldn't make people happy, but I could help you have purpose and help you find meaning in the work that you were doing in our school. So that was really, when I first started this journey as a principal and then later central office and then superintendent, I never really, forgot that personal mission that I had to help people find purpose and meaning in their work.
When I think back on that, and you mentioned shared vision, that I think is what gave us ownership. Mm-hmm. Like, you weren't just following your vision. And I knew from working with you that you had a very clear vision, right, but all of a sudden was our vision. And I think people were much more willing to get on board because it was something that we all came to together. You often, it was the kind of thing where because of that work you did, it was you said jump and we said, the proverbial how high, because we were willing to do that because I think we were in it together. We knew we were in it together. What was the thing you told people who didn't feel it was a fit for them?
Well, I think first of all, I told them that that I would help them find another school in the district where they could fit, where they felt that their strengths could be used in the most effective way for them. And so if it was something that they didn't want to do, I was very open to that. I think the other thing from a leadership standpoint was understanding that it wasn't going to fit for everybody, and that everybody was at a different part in their life where they could make a commitment like you're talking about. People were willing to do it, but not everybody made the same commitment. I think you have to sometimes people have young children, sometimes people have older parents. They can't always make the commitments and then people would some of my colleagues might be upset that people couldn't make that same commitment. But I think understanding where people were in their life but also understanding that if this collaborative approach, if this, implementing school-wide enrichment or whatever it was the initiative, that didn't resonate with them. And I think you might remember, I was there when we went from junior high to middle school. And so your point being that some people didn't want to work in a middle school. Some people were ninth grade teachers. They wanted to go to the high school. And then we had some sixth grade teachers. I can remember 2 in particular that retired before we went to middle school. They didn't want to come to a middle school. So I think, and being understanding that and being open to that and not taking that personally, I think it was important. And then being able to have a very direct, but yet compassionate conversation with people to say, how can I help you get where you need to be? So that's how I tried to handle that. And I think over the years, we had some people that I had to have a little more direct conversations with over several things. But at the same time, I think being open and trying to really understand what, everybody needed, but yet how do we come together and have a collective approach to that? Because education, let's be clear, John, you could go shut your room and do what you want to do, right? As long as you're not really hurting anybody, or you didn't really have to talk to your colleagues. You didn't really have to do any of that. And I think what I pushed hard was that collaborative leadership. And I would tell people, and did throughout my career, superintendent, and principal, I don't mind walking point. I don't mind being the leader. But when I turn around, I want to know that we're all working on the same page, right? We're all pushing in the same directions. And if there's something that needs to be discussed, I want that feedback so we can continue to talk about it. So I think it's open communication and transparency around all of that someone fits or doesn't fit, right? You as a leader, you have to be willing to have that conversation and not take it personally.
There's a couple of things you said that I want to just go back to a little bit. You talked about people are in different places in their lives and how that affected their decisions about commitment and where they were at with our school. Right. How important was that when you learn people's stories, how did that help you support them?
Well, I just think everyone has a story, right? We were talking about this the other day, and we actually presented on this. When we were just in Tampa at the first annual coalition of state school board associations, presenting on navigating the turbulence. How do you do that? And part of that is being an authentic leader and understanding yourself, but it's also understanding other people and understanding their journey. So if I knew that someone had young children, I didn't press them to serve on bunches of committees because I know they had other important things in their life. Being a parent is very important to people, right? So they're not going to. I often said, and you might remember the cartoon I had, something about bacon and eggs, but the chicken makes a contribution and the pig makes a commitment to bacon and eggs, right? So, some people can just do more because they're at, where I'm at in my life now with my kids. My kids are grown and raising their own kids. There's a lot more I could do that I couldn't do when I had young children, right? So I think just understanding that and supporting them, and I don't know if it's supporting them, but not looking as if they're not doing the best job that they can do. If you have an older parent, you got to care for them. You got to do that. You might remember, I didn't get hung up about the clock so much. And I did end up putting in a little bit of a bus duty in the morning because we had so many kids out front. You might recall that. And we had about 1,000 kids through the building. And all I said was, I need you like once every 2 weeks to help me out front otherwise, you can come and go. I would get in trouble with the central office because I'd have people go complain to the KEA. Luckily, I had 2 people that were on the KEA board, and they would say, leave him alone. He's not making us do anything we don't want to do. So, because I didn't really watch the clock, but when I needed you, and I needed you to be there. And then people were able to make those commitments on those smaller time frames. And you might recall, I pushed everything into that early release time. We didn't have a separate staff meeting. I just said, we're going to meet 3 Wednesdays a month and the 4th one you're off. And I actually got more out of that than I would have if I would have tried to have all these different meetings and really tried to understand how hard it is. I never forgot what it was like to be a teacher. And I think teaching is the hardest profession there is.
Remembering what it was like to be a teacher and understanding that they had other things. I remember that flexibility with the schedule a little bit. And I felt like people didn't take advantage of that so much as they just knew that when they needed to go a little earlier, come in a little late, that was something that you would work with them on.
Yeah, and I remember people coming and say, "Can I go to my kids? Their child was in another elementary. Can I go to their? They're going to have their practice for whatever event, concert, whatever it might be. Because sometimes you would practice during the day for the kids, and then do it at night. And a lot of times parents say, "Can I go?" Or our teachers would ask, "Can I go?" And I say, "Sure, let's get someone to cover your class." And that's the one I got in trouble from HR. It's like, they called me up and said, you can't let people. And I said, but if we're supposed to be about the family, why wouldn't we be doing that? So, that's where my, one of my Gallup strengths is belief. And so, one of my first years in Kenosha, Dr. Husmanik had the year of the family. And I thought it was odd because he would make us attend every school board meeting, right? We had to go. And I was an assistant principal. I mean, they were never going to call on me for anything. But, we were required to go to those things. But I thought, this is the year of the family. I mean, wait a minute, So I wanted to make sure that we align things. I was superintendent here in Omaha, and we had a policy where we had unlimited sick leave for the teacher, but they had no family leave. If their kid was sick, they actually had to call up and lie and say, "I'm unable to come to school today," because they couldn't say, "I'm staying home with my kid," because that wasn't allowed. So I went to the board and said, do we really want to encourage our teachers to lie to us? Or do we want to give them, 6 or 7 family illness days? Can we negotiate that with them? And they said, well, of course. And so we ended up negotiating some time because I didn't want people to have to lie to me to be able to take care of their kid. That just made no sense to me.
Do you find, you've worked with a lot of principals, a lot of other administrators, do you find that they operate in the same ways that you do about core beliefs and family and understanding people's stories? Or are you kind of the Lone Ranger?
Oh, I don't think I'm a Lone Ranger with that. I think that we're losing some of that. What I feel is being forgotten. I think there's 2 things that we could really improve upon in our profession or former professions. And that's the engagement of students in the classroom. And I think through the pandemic, we really missed an opportunity to, let some things go and keep some things that worked following all of that difficulty. But we really was a great learning experience, I think, in many ways. And then engaging our teachers. And I think my main focus has been throughout is really to how do I really help engage people. And I think part of that, what's been lost is this concept that Robert Greenleaf's viewpoints on servant leadership, that I'm there to serve the community. This is not my school. It's not my ego is not too much. I mean, you got to have a little bit of ego to be the principal and the superintendent, no doubt about it. But you also have to understand that you're serving the community. And I think that's what we're losing a little bit, this idea that we're serving the community so that we can engage people in what they're doing and make sure, what I love about the Gallup strengths is, we want people to do their best work on a daily basis. And that's really using your top 10 to 12 natural strengths. I mean, 90% of how you behave and how you lead, it comes from your strongest strengths, right? Your signature strengths. So it's just a natural way that you behave. So I think I don't think it's a Lone Ranger thing. I just think people have forgotten that you're there to serve. And
you attributed that somewhat to the pandemic and how we lost some of that. Are there other factors that are contributing to that kind of that disengagement?
Well, I think it's probably a generational thing to a little bit, the way that, you talk about people's stories and people's journeys, how you were reared and how you did things, and the time period that you grew up, I think does impact how you lead and how you do things. And so, my parents were, children of the Depression. My dad served in World War II and was just happy to come home alive. And of course he wanted to contribute to his community, right? Because he saw so many people that didn't make it home and couldn't contribute to their community and do good things. So, my dad taught, we grew up in Southern Ohio where, education was not really valued. And, my dad would have people come into his law office and they couldn't read or write. But he would always say, they deserve my best work because I could tell them anything. Right? They really need me to help them do well. And that really had an impact on me and being able to serve that community in that way. And and do what was right for people. So it really made a difference. So I think, as we lose some of those values of the greatest generation, of course, that's my bias, right? Because that's who reared me. But I think helping people understand that those things are really important, the idea of honesty and dependability. And, there's some things about that generation, certainly they were flawed, that I wouldn't want to repeat, but there's things about service and being able to serve both your community and your country that resonate with me. And then growing up with John Kennedy and his inaugural speech of 1960, which hung on my dad's office wall, being able to serve your country in some way is important. And I felt that's what we did as teachers, is we were able to serve that community and make sure that our young people grew up and found their pathway forward to a successful life. That was important to me.
So you talk about servant leadership and how that's slipped, how we've lost that idea. How do we get that back?
Yeah, and I think servant leadership is I'm serving so that you can grow and you can develop, right? I'm trying to develop all those people around me. So I think it goes back to collaborative leadership and really being able to, as we talked about with building shared visions and collective values as an organization or as a community, that starts with the school board. I think that helps us navigate the turbulence that we're feeling right now because we stand for something. And we know what we don't stand for, right? So, there's a couple of things. So I go back to the collaborative leadership piece, really making an impact in terms of helping people grow and develop, not just your students, but your staff. I think that school districts should be doing succession planning right away. They should be preparing people, the next generation of leaders, whether they identify, we used to identify we would use the Gallup insights on principles. And so once you got tenure, we'd have you take the principles insight and we would begin to understand who has talent to be a leader. Maybe I get them on that committee. Maybe I can, we're looking for opportunities to build the capacity internally. And you might remember a lot of times I wanted our teachers to be doing the presenting when we did professional learning. I wanted to pay you to do it. Why would I want to pay someone from the outside? I have great leaders right here inside. And I think it's also understanding that leadership comes from every corner. I have a article right over here I'm going to send out to, I have a little group of people I send articles to, but one of them is you don't have to be a boss to be a leader, right? So everyone can be a leader, but if you don't allow people that leadership, then they'll never develop it. So a great example, when I was at Shorewood, Wisconsin as superintendent, I used to give a district-wide responsibility. We were small, so everyone had a district-wide response, every administrator, right? The middle school principal was also the special ed director, which was a big job. The assistant principal at the high school was our safety director. And I remember one night we had severe weather right at the end of school, and he locked down the building. We got to wait to hear, you're not, and everyone was saying, Blane, we can leave, we can go. And I said, well, Tim's in charge. I didn't walk in and overrule him right away. Tim's in charge. He studies this. He knows what we're supposed to do. He's put the protocols in place. We need to listen to Tim. He's leading this. And it goes back to Sir Giovanni's work around sometimes as a leader, you got to know when to lead and you also have no one to follow. He called it followership, but there's also a followership to that. So I didn't know much about band, but if I came to you, you could tell me all about what I needed to know, and I had to listen, right? You were the leader in that area. So anyway, that's kind of how I tried to handle some of that. And that's what I think we're losing. I think people who are sometimes our leaders, they want to be more direct and more top down. And I think you see a shift to, less collaborative work, trying to work together, whether it's in a school district or in a community or in our country. People don't really want to come together and really, they want to talk past each other, I think. And I think that's troubling. So.
I think that's true. And I think it affects our schools. It affects our communities. It affects all of that because we're this way. We're separated. That's a key point too about how much leadership are you willing to allow? And I think I told you this story. I used to have student teachers and their cooperating teacher would come to observe, and it wasn't the student teacher who was doing the warm-ups, it was my kids. Yeah. And he looked at me and said, "What, do you do this all the time?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I want those leaders from as many chairs as I can possibly get, because when those when they take on that leadership in my band program, that's what's going to make my band program stronger. So the student teacher still had stuff to do, but I fostered that leadership from any chair because, and other teachers were like, why do you do that? They just didn't understand how I could let go of that control.
Right.
But I knew the benefit of it.
Well, and I knew that control was an illusion. I've written a lot on top-down leadership versus this collaborative leadership, and control is you think you can control people. That's just mind-boggling. You can't control anybody. So, and I didn't like to be controlled either. That's one reason I called myself not an entrepreneur, but I was a intrapreneur, what Gallup calls, because I was within a system, and I thought, I wanted to change the system from within. I didn't want to blow it up. I wanted to work from within. But when you give up control, you get influence back tenfold. Because when I gave you control of what you're doing, you would come and say, "Is it okay if I do it this way? I want to run the concerts like this." And you're doing the same thing with the kids in those chairs, right? But I would have teachers, "Is it okay if yeah, sure, it's okay to do." You might remember I had these questions. Is it legal? Does it fit with district policy? Is it good for kids? And will I get fired?
Exactly.
I could say yes and no to the last one. I'm like, hey, let's give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, we'll fix it. Kind of thing, right? It's not going to be bad for kids. We're going to try to do something really good for them, but it may not work out. You remember the "I blew it" card. Hey, I tried something new and innovative. It didn't work, so get off my back.
Right.
Because I'm trying. We wanted people to be innovative. We wanted them to try things, and so you have to loosen that up a little bit. And I always trade. I'm trading control for influence. I'd rather be an influential leader than a control leader.
I think too, when you give people that autonomy to try something new, to go in a different direction, as long as it fits your guidelines, they're doing it because they want to make the experience better for their kids, make the learning better, and how that can be nothing but a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when we were one of the first schools to put in the fob way back. I put that in early on. I didn't let them put in a buzzer system, but I did put the fob in, and we put a fob on the office and one on the end door so the towel guy could come in, and the one on the back door so the milkman could get in. And because we were leaving the doors wide open at 5:30, and Danny would go around and clean, and the milk guy would come, but the doors were wide open because people had to come in. So it was really interesting, John, because once we put that fob on the office, people would stay routinely till 6 o'clock because they could come in and out of the office on their own. We weren't there. I left at 5 or whatever, 4:35, whatever it was. The secretaries definitely left at probably 4:30. And so you couldn't get in and out of the office. But once we put that fob in, people had control of the office. They could go in, they could do what they needed to do. It was amazing. And people knew I played basketball on the weekend. They're like, "Hey, can I come in on Saturday? Are you guys playing ball on Saturday?" I'm like, "Yeah, we'll be there from, 7 to 11 or whatever."
And that speaks to the level of trust too, because when you let people know you trust them, some people will take advantage of that, but most people won't. And that idea of trust, and oh, you mean I can come into the office and make copies at 5:30, so I don't have to get here at 6:30 in the morning.
Right.
That's trust, and that's a beautiful thing. And that goes to what you were talking about before, where you were just understanding of people's stories and what they needed and what was best for them to do.
Well, and if you got to get your kid, like if your husband picks them up in the evening, but you have to take them in the morning or whatever it is, right? I mean, it fit more their own schedule and how they wanted to do. Again, it's appreciating your user. I was in Tampa and I was talking, I forget where they were from, but they're getting ready to pass either a policy or a law that they're not going to let the high school start till after 8:30. Traditionally high schools always start early just because of, but we know from a adolescent point of view that they need their sleep, right? So starting later. So it was kind of interesting to see somebody finally actually doing something about that, right? And addressing that and addressing what that user really needs, as opposed to, practice might be in the dark or something.
I want to take two sides of something. I want you to talk about like your favorite story as an administrator or a principal. And then I want you to think about one of those stories that would go back to you referenced the I blew it card. Like,
Yeah.
what's one thing you had a chance to do over? So what's your favorite story? And they might be the same.
Yeah, I've been sort of blessed throughout my career on really, I guess it's probably in all, this is a theme that probably runs through each of my jobs, but I think being able to shift the culture in these buildings. And, you talk about, we'll use Bullen as the example, but I think I could use any, but we really focus back on a student-centered culture. It was really important. And I say this because my wife has been with me throughout this journey. And every time she came to wherever I worked, she would notice, she would say, I know it's working. There's talking about education in the hallway, or they're talking about education, teachers are talking, they're not talking about other things. They're talking about what they could do to help kids. And so I think I'm most proud of really focusing on that culture, making it student-centered, not about the adults, but yet supporting the adults so they could support the kids. And I think, to me, school culture, I wrote my dissertation on it. To me, that's why the shared vision was so important. The values are so important. You have to have a positive culture, and it needs to be focused on something bigger than yourself, right? If it's all about you, we won't get the kind of commitment and the kind of contributions that we're talking about. Now, when it comes to some things that I would want to do over, that's interesting, because I don't have many regrets in life.
Which is a nice thing.
I think most things work out the way that they're supposed to work out. What comes to mind, I guess, is when we had, and I'm thinking Bullen, but when we had the anthrax scare, I'm assuming you were still there when that happened. And I would do some of that over. I mean, we were pretty well prepared, better prepared than I think other schools to handle something like that. But I don't think I was as clear with my communication as I could have been with the kids, because I think they thought there was an intruder when there wasn't an intruder. And so if I had to go back, and I would do some of that over. And I think, generally speaking, I think when I ran into troubles, when I was not as clear, I didn't communicate as clearly as I should have. I really like Kim Scott's work on radical candor. I always said, I'm going to be direct, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to be very compassionate but direct with people, which is what I try to do. And with evaluations and evaluating people, I was really coaching them and getting them to go where they wanted to go. But I think if I could do anything over in my career, it would be not that I wasn't a good communicator. I think sometimes you're a little hesitant, but you can be kind and direct. She talks about being obnoxiously aggressive or ruinously empathetic, or and there's a third one in there, and then there's the radical candor, which is being kind and direct. And I think we can all do that, but we all need that feedback, right? And I think after leaving Bullen, I got really a lot better at the two-way feedback loops of really wanting to know what people thought. I'm reading another article over here about how do leaders get feedback, right? I mean, you have to be willing to get that feedback and be willing to listen to that without, without, again, taking it personally, right? But it's the only way to make it better is to know what's going on. I do that differently, I think.
Okay. The outrageous, the candor that you talked about.
Yeah.
Landmark Education calls that ruthless compassion.
Yeah, there you go. Same thing. Yeah.
Where you have to say it, but you can do it in a way that's going to let people keep their dignity intact and still move forward in a way that's.
And I think evaluation was like that. I had several people tell me, you're the only person who really gave me some really good feedback that I could work on. And these were people that that were not always the easiest people to get along with, and they were had been around a long time, but they'd never really been evaluated in a sense about where do you want to be, what do you want to what do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. How do you want to be a better teacher? And I let them lead that evaluation but my job was to ask those questions to be a mirror for somebody. That's why I like Charlotte Danielson's evaluation domains and all that. It was really about how am I a mirror for you to be able to grow and develop. And again, that's that servant leader, right? That's saying, I'm going to help you grow and develop to where you want to be. And all that kind of led me into, really moving toward this personalized learning approach for kids. All kids, understanding your learner and knowing who they are. You can't teach them unless you know them. And
Exactly.
I think the same thing's true when you talk about story. You can't lead people unless you know them.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Blane, as we come around the corner here to the end of our time together, if you were talking to a group of administrators or you were talking to a group of people and you wanted to leave them with one thing to think about as they go forward, what would it be?
I think it would be empathy, developing your empathy, understanding what your user needs is how the people at the D school describe empathy. I think you have to know what the people you're leading, what they need from you, and what your students need. And Gallup talks about what followers need from their leaders. Leaders are always good to tell people. I was always good about telling you what I needed from you. I needed a good band program, John. I needed to have those things, right? I wanted those things for our building, right? I was, I can be a little competitive. I wanted us to be really, really, really one of the best schools in Kenosha, but I've learned that what do followers need? And they need compassion. They need trust. They need stability, and they need hope. And I think our leaders in various ways, and you'll provide that differently because we all lead differently, but people need that from their leaders. They need to be trusted that they're doing their job. They need compassion when things don't go well. They need stability when you're cutting the budget. It's all going to be okay. And they need hope that, we can get this vision done. We can do this. I know it's a big vision, but we can accomplish this. And I think, I intuitively, I kind of did all that. It was nice to see it come out in writing by somebody who did research around it.
Blane, this has been an extraordinary interview. There's just some real gold here for people who are aspiring leaders or people who've been in it for a while and might need a infusion of some fresh hope, some fresh ideas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you, John. A chance to have this conversation means a lot to me. And I love this. I can't give up. I don't have the stamina to still do it on a full-time basis, but I think public education and what we did for 40 years is so important. And, I want to be able to give back to the next generation in any way that I can. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Blane. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of 2 Talk Smart. Look for more episodes in the very near future. I'm John Nepper. Let's change the world one conversation at a time.